You've been told the Roman Testudo formation was an impenetrable moving fortress that dominated battlefields through tactical genius. But the soldiers locked inside that shield wall were experiencing something closer to coordinated suffocation. A grinding mechanical nightmare where your survival depended on trusting that the men around you wouldn't collapse, panic, or die in ways that would bring the entire formation crashing down on top of you. Right now, in historical reenactments and strategy games, the Testudo looks elegant, almost beautiful, shields clicking together in perfect synchronization, an armored tortoise advancing inexorably toward enemy walls. But when you read the actual accounts from soldiers who fought in these formations, when you examine the medical records of injuries sustained, when you calculate the physical mechanics of what it actually required, you discover that the Testudo wasn't tactical brilliance. It was controlled catastrophe, and the men inside it knew exactly how close they were to death at every single moment. Here's what actually happened when a Roman century formed Testudo. You're a legionary in the second rank, shield raised above your head at a 45-degree angle, locked edge to edge with the shields of the men beside and in front of you. Your left arm is bearing the full weight of your scutum, 22 pounds of layered wood, linen, and metal, held at an unnatural angle that puts maximum stress on your shoulder socket. Within 2 minutes, your deltoid is screaming. Within 5 minutes, you're experiencing the beginning stages of muscle failure. The formation hasn't even started moving yet. The officers are still shouting final positioning orders. You're already in pain. Now add the weight that's about to be transferred to you. The man behind you is going to press his shield forward, overlapping yours, adding his 22 pounds to your load. Depending on your position in the formation, you might be supporting not just your own shield, but distributing pressure from 2 or 3 others. The men in the front rank have it worst. They're holding shields horizontally in front while supporting the overhead canopy from beneath. They're bearing upward of 60 to 70 pounds of distributed weight on arms that need to stay ready to thrust with a gladius the moment the formation contacts enemy lines. The physiological reality is brutal. The human shoulder joint isn't designed for sustained load bearing at those angles. Orthopedic analysis of Testudo positioning shows that soldiers would begin experiencing acute pain within 3 to 4 minutes and muscle failure within 10 to 12 minutes depending on conditioning. But you don't get to stop. The formation is moving now, advancing at what the manuals call measured pace. That's approximately 1 step every 2 seconds, agonizingly slow, mechanically precise. You can't see where you're going. Your entire field of vision is the back of the shield in front of you and the narrow gaps where you can glimpse boot heels. You're navigating by sound and by maintaining contact with the men on either side. If you lose synchronization, if your step falls out of rhythm, shields separate, gaps appear, and gaps in a testudo are where men die. The temperature inside the formation is climbing. 60 to 80 men packed body to body, breathing hard, exerting maximum effort, wearing wool tunics under metal armor. There's no air circulation. The only ventilation is whatever slips through the shield gaps. Within minutes, you're drenched in sweat. Your grip on the shield handle is starting to slip. Your vision is narrowing from heat and exertion. This is happening to everyone around you simultaneously. The formation's integrity depends on every single man maintaining physical and mental function while his body is entering the early stages of heat exhaustion. Here's where it gets truly disturbing. You're approaching the enemy wall now. You can hear projectiles impacting the shield roof above you, arrows, javelins, stones from slings. Each impact transfers kinetic energy through the shields directly into the arms of the men holding them. A well-placed stone from a ballista can hit with enough force to break the arm of the soldier whose shield takes the impact, even if the shield itself doesn't fail. You hear the man 3 rows up scream. You don't know if his arm broke or if his shield splintered or if something penetrated. You keep walking. The formation doesn't stop for individual casualties. If he goes down, the men around him have to close the gap instantly or the entire section becomes vulnerable. The Romans practiced this repeatedly. Training manuals from the period describe testudo drills where sentries would hold formation for extended periods while trainers threw blunt projectiles at the shield wall to simulate combat conditions. Soldiers learned to absorb impacts, to compensate for wounded men, to maintain cohesion even as individuals failed. But training and actual combat are physiologically different experiences. Training doesn't include the adrenaline spike of real danger, the knowledge that the next impact might shatter your shield or the shield above you, sending splinters into your face and neck. Training doesn't include watching the man next to you take a ballista bolt through a gap that appeared when someone in the row ahead stumbled. If you've been paying attention to what warfare actually requires from human bodies, consider hitting that subscribe button on Mythbusting, because we're about to go deeper into the mechanical nightmare that Roman soldiers experienced in the name of tactical doctrine. The testudo continues advancing. You've been in formation for maybe 8 minutes now. Your left arm has progressed from pain to numbness. That's not relief, that's the beginning of nerve compression from sustained unnatural positioning. Your right hand is locked around your gladius, but you haven't used it yet. You're just carrying it, keeping it ready, while your left side bears all the weight. The base of the wall is 20 feet ahead. You know this only because the officer's voice changes pitch in his cadence calls. The men in the front rank are going to have to transition from testudo to assault formation in seconds, going from defensive shield bearers to attackers while under maximum enemy fire. This is the moment of peak vulnerability. This is where formations break. The front rank has to drop or reposition shields, expose themselves, and begin climbing or battering while the ranks behind maintain the roof. It requires perfect timing and absolute trust that the men behind you will hold. You're in the second rank now, the front rank has moved forward to engage, which means you've just stepped into their position. You're now at maximum exposure. Your shield is no longer supporting weight from above. It's protecting you from direct frontal assault. The man who was behind you is now beside you. The formation has compressed, tightened. You can smell his fear, you can hear his breathing. 20 seconds ago, he was relatively protected. Now he's in the killing zone with you. This is the part historians rarely mention. The testudo wasn't designed to fight in. It was designed to deliver soldiers to a fighting position while minimizing casualties during the approach. But minimizing is relative. Roman military medical records, as fragmentary as they are, show that testudo approaches against fortified positions regularly resulted in casualty rates of 15 to 25%, even when the formation held perfectly. Those are the men who took projectiles through gaps, who collapsed from heat exhaustion and were trampled, who suffered shield failures, who experienced muscle failure at critical moments and created vulnerabilities that killed the men around them. And when the formation failed catastrophically, when someone in a critical load-bearing position went down wrong, when shields separated in multiple places simultaneously, when the synchronized rhythm broke, casualty rates jumped to 70–80%. The testudo transformed from protective formation into a trap. Men couldn't scatter because they were locked together. They couldn't defend themselves individually because their shields were positioned for formation work, not personal combat. They died in clusters, still trying to maintain a formation that had already failed, because training and discipline kept them following doctrine even when doctrine was killing them. You're at the wall now. Your job is to protect the men who are using ladders and siege equipment. You're not climbing yet. You're part of the shield cover. This means you're standing at the base of a wall while defenders above drop stones, pour boiling oil, shoot arrows directly down at angles that make your shield nearly useless. You raise it higher, trying to create overhead protection. Your arm is shaking uncontrollably now. It's been 15 minutes of sustained maximum exertion. Muscle physiology says you're operating on nothing but willpower at this point. The man beside you drops his shield. You don't know if he's dead or if his arm failed. It doesn't matter. You have to sidestep, extend your shield to cover his position, maintain protection for the climbers. Your field of responsibility just doubled. Your arm is failing, you hold anyway. The psychological component is as devastating as the physical. You've trained for this. You've practiced shield drills until the movements were automatic. But no amount of training prepares you for the reality of sustained threat combined with total loss of individual agency. In the testudo, you can't run, you can't dodge, you can't make tactical decisions. Your survival depends entirely on collective cohesion. If the men around you hold, you might live. If they break, you die, you have no control. And your brain, running on adrenaline and cortisol, is screaming at you to exercise control, to make individual survival decisions, while your training demands you suppress every survival instinct and maintain formation. Roman military discipline was legendary precisely because it had to overcome these psychological realities. Soldiers were drilled to the point where formation maintenance became more automatic than self-preservation. But that discipline came at enormous psychological cost. Medical historians examining skeletal remains of Roman legionaries have identified stress markers consistent with chronic anxiety disorders, changes in bone density near muscle attachments, indicators of prolonged elevated cortisol, dental evidence of grinding and clenching. These men lived in sustained states of stress that permanently altered their physiology. Now understand the machinery of command that made testudo deployments possible. Roman officers knew the casualty rates. They knew the physical toll. They knew that asking a century to form testudo and advance on a fortified position was asking 20 to 30 men to die or be permanently disabled. They gave the order anyway, because Roman military doctrine valued collective success over individual survival. Officers were trained to calculate acceptable losses. A 25% casualty rate to take a wall section was considered acceptable if it achieved the tactical objective. The men in the Testudo were mechanized components of a military system that had thoroughly calculated their expendability, and the men knew this. They weren't naive. They understood the mathematics of their situation. Roman legionaries were career soldiers, not conscripts. They'd seen Testudo advances before. They'd participated in the grim accounting of casualties after successful operations. They knew that their specific body might be part of the acceptable loss percentage. They formed up anyway, because refusing meant execution for cowardice, and because military culture had successfully convinced them that dying in formation was honorable while dying outside formation was shameful. The horrible efficiency of the system was that it worked often enough to be worth the cost by Roman military calculation standards. Testudo formations did take walls. They did protect siege equipment. They did deliver soldiers to assault positions with lower casualties than unprotected advances. The tactic was effective by the metrics that mattered to commanders: walls breached, positions taken, campaigns won. The fact that it was a grinding mechanical nightmare for the men inside was irrelevant to tactical assessment. That account was considered inappropriate for inclusion in official military histories. It focused too much on individual suffering, not enough on collective glory. But it's one of the only surviving descriptions of what Testudo combat actually felt like from inside the formation, and it reads like a horror story, not a tactical manual. The long-term physical consequences were catastrophic for survivors. Orthopedic analysis of legionary skeletal remains shows patterns of shoulder damage consistent with Testudo positioning: rotator cuff tears, joint deterioration, compression fractures in cervical vertebrae from bearing overhead weight. These weren't injuries that healed. They were permanent disabilities that affected men for the rest of their lives. A legionary who survived multiple Testudo assaults might be alive, but he was rarely physically intact. His military service record might show 20 years of honorable duty. His body showed the accumulated cost of repeatedly performing biomechanically destructive actions because tactical doctrine required it. The definitive truth is this: the Testudo wasn't a defensive formation. It was a mechanism for converting human suffering into tactical advantage. The men inside it weren't protected. They were constrained in ways that made them more effective as military units while making them more vulnerable as individuals. They endured sustained physical agony, psychological terror, and permanent disability because Roman military culture had successfully convinced them that formation integrity was more important than personal survival. The grinding mechanical nightmare wasn't a flaw in the tactic. It was the tactic's core feature. Roman commanders understood perfectly well what they were asking men to endure. They ordered Testudo formations anyway repeatedly for centuries because the system valued strategic success over human cost. The shields clicking together in perfect synchronization, that sound that seems so impressive in reconstructions, was the sound of men accepting systematic destruction because their culture had given them no framework for understanding their experience as anything other than duty. So what other celebrated military tactic should we examine for the human cost that's been edited out of the triumphant histories? Drop your suggestions in the comments below.